welcome to Student Spotlights. This is a series of interviews with third-year students to coincide with the digital showcase at Manchester School of Arts. I'm joined by 3 Art Theory and Practice students, which covers 4 programmes: Art History and Curating, Fine Art and Curating, and Fine Art and Art History. So welcome Husk, Maya and Elaine. All based in different corners of the country. We've got Maya in Brighton, Elaine in Plymouth, and Husk, you're here temporarily in Manchester, but due to go back to Belfast. Yeah. How are you all doing?
Great.
Very well.
Fine.
Good. All right, it would be great to start with you each introducing a bit about yourself. You could talk a bit about your practice and just introduce some of the work that you've submitted for the digital showcase. So I'll just get some images up, but if we could start with you, Husk, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, so my practice is just very idiosyncratic. Like it just happens from like what I see day to day, and I get really like trapped with ideas and they become like much larger than I notice them becoming. And like I was making a lot of like quite self-reflective work and like work about Cats the musical, and it was all kind of about the absurdity of like British identity and feeling like I had this view on it that a lot of my friends didn't have because they were British and it was like commonplace to them, and just kind of feeling like strange about it all.
So you predominantly work in painting, and I know that you've recently moved back to Belfast, although you're here for a short while. So has the move kind of impacted your work at all?
Well, I think like the whole time that I had my studio space, like I always viewed it as like a massive privilege to have. So I think moving back to Belfast really made me realize like painting is great whenever you have the facility to do it. And I think like it's a really easy way to like visually represent what you want to, and you can just do it whenever you have a studio space. But then having like any limitations on it, I think it becomes different. And then living at home, there's no separation between like the domestic life and the like art practice, and I think there needs to be. I probably need to develop that a bit better, but like yeah, I think like then I started working in video because I was doing all these Zoom meetings with my friends, quizzes, family, like group calls, and like everything became like on a screen, like it was a performance, and there were all these things happening constantly, all like limited by like the screen, and like things existed like within your phone and your laptop, and your life outside of that kind of like dried up essentially. Like I would get really panicky even going on a walk with a mask on because people would be far too close to me. So I haven't really left my house except whenever I need to.
So you have a number of video works, and are these going to be shown on the digital showcase as well? Yeah,
so I've got, I guess like it's hard to really speak about the video work that I've been making as a whole because it has existed for like 3-4 months. But I think like social media and video and like Instagram and photography has always been really integral to what I do, but not in what I really present. But like Instagram and like Instagram stories, and I was doing like a lot of Instagram lives and Instagram stories of things that I was just kind of doing anyway, but I've done this for like years and it's always been fine art, but I've never really paid it much attention because I was just doing it anyway. Like in first year, I had this like recurring thing where like before I would shave, I would like go live on Instagram and like just like not speak, not interact to anyone and just shave. And I remember I like didn't even pay it like a second thought that it was like a strange thing to do, or like it just never came into it. And then one day my friend who was driving for Uber Eats was like, yeah, I was watching you shave on Instagram Live while I was riding my bike around Manchester. I was kind of like, oh, maybe this does deserve like a second thought.
Yeah, because it's a real departure from your paintings and installations that you were doing in the studio, but it's just provided a different platform to still be productive through this time. So yeah, have you found it as a useful platform?
I find it useful. I find it quite exciting. It kind of came from like I don't like how people. I don't like a lot of video art. I think it's really boring and long, and I think it's really selfish of an artist to make something 30 minutes long and really dull. And like, do you know what I mean? It just feels very like, oh, I'm an artist and like I deserve 30 minutes of your time. Like, you don't. Like a painting you can walk past, like a sculpture you can walk past. Whereas a video art, because like we're all nosy, we're all selfish, we want to sit and look through it and watch it. And I have like an inherent problem with video art. So like it's kind of like a response to that, but it's also a response to like the very immediate, direct, like lockdown situation where everything is just digital. And like then that kind of comes around to like me thinking about my attention span, how often I'm watching like 15-second TikToks and like sometimes getting bored by them. Like my brain has went to nothing.
Mm-hmm. And how integral is humor for you?
Yeah, I think humor's really like it's so easy to like for me, humor is just second nature. Like it just happens. I feel like there's so much art that doesn't really give much sincerity. It's all like there's quite a lot of stuff that's quite cold and like unforgiving in a way. Whereas I think by just being honest and like I think humor is a very like human quality. And like I feel like what I make, it just does happen. It just there's no real massive thought processes behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So like humor just comes into it, like it just happens. I feel like it would be really strange if I didn't incorporate any humor into what I do.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Husk. I'm sure we'll get back to some of those things in a little bit. But for now, Maya, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Maya. My work has been a commentary on my experiences as a woman of colour, growing up in I found out that my county is 97.7% white, which is fun. And so I've used my painting practice in second and third year as a way of exploring my direct experiences of racism, but also my interest. Well, and I suppose I have an interest because I have these ongoing questions about belonging, and I'm a person of mixed heritage, so I don't belong to either side of my identity. I can't go to India and claim that I'm Indian. They will not. They will not say that I am. But I'm also, according to people that I've grown up with and the experiences that I've had, I'm not white enough to be here either, which is an uncomfortable thing to be sitting with, given that I've always lived here. And I feel like in so many other ways I am English, British, whatever the ish is that people want to give you. So I've used my the fact that I am a mixture of colours as a way of exploring colour theory. And in the last 6 months, the work has generally been about how can I manipulate colour in a way that is quite subtle, just by changing undertones or using opposite colours and mixing, and how does that change the way colours sit next to each other. So it reflects why is the fact that my sister, for example, who has the same heritage as me, why is she deemed so different to her friend just because of the slight colour of her skin tone? And same for me, but she's much paler than me, so it's a little bit more slight, which is why I use her as the example. and it's about ongoing questions of identity and belonging and home, which has been more interesting since lockdown, given that I'm back in my childhood home painting.
I was going to ask about your experience of, you talked about your county, and what has been your experience of living in Manchester?
Well, before I started explicitly exploring race in my paintings, I used to use where I live, right next to the countryside, right next to the sea, the shapes from that as my like basis for any form of art that I was making. So a lot of the work was about natural shapes from the Sussex Downs. But then this like big thing happened in my life that meant that I really wanted to kind of work out my position as a brown person. And that big thing happened here. It took over my life, so it did affect my life in Manchester. And Manchester is so much more diverse than Sussex is. So I haven't had, but I feel more comfortable living there, but I'm also the only person of colour on our course. And art school is it's well documented how it's not the most diverse place. And I actually feel this very strange parallel between art school and Brighton, because Brighton is an incredibly creative place. You can literally be anyone. You can walk down the street as a flamingo and no one will bat an eyelid. But I've always said you could be anyone as long as you're white in Brighton. And that doesn't mean that Brighton's a racist place by any means, and it doesn't mean that art school's a racist place by any means. It just means that they're not diverse places. So it's been quite interesting to have those experiences. And I don't think it would have been different if I'd gone to an art school in London, for example, just because I have friends that go there and they're not as diverse either. So I think it's weird to like be in Manchester, which is super diverse, and then you go in your building and then it kind of it doesn't reflect what's out on campus or whatever.
And recently, I just wondered if you could just say a little bit about the project you've been doing, I'm assuming since lockdown, with the I think this is an example, some one-of-a-kind paintings and fundraising some money for Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, so it's actually been the last 3 weeks, so post last assignment. I was really planning on putting my paints away forever when I finished uni, and but with everything that's been going on across the world with Black Lives Matter, I really wanted to, having explored race through my paintings, having it basically written about race at any opportunity in my academic work, I really wanted to show some solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement as a non-Black person of colour. I think that it's really important to make that differentiation. This isn't about me as a brown person, but I also can talk about it maybe in a way that my white friends can't. So I wanted to use what I've got to make some money and fundraise. So I've done over 40 paintings now. Most of them have been A5. There have been a few people, family friends, for example, who I know have donated quite a substantial amount of money that I did, for example, this one, which is an A3. And yeah, I've raised over £400. So I'm pretty happy.
That's a super level of productivity in 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's been a lot of work, but it's been really good actually, because it's kind of interesting what happens at once. I'm kind of going through another like burst of this, dealing with the racist experiences that I've experienced in the last month. And what I have realized is that painting throughout the last 2 years has been my way of dealing with it, and it's how I make sense of what has happened to me with friendships. And the last month has been difficult because of issues to do with race. And it's, as much as I obviously am painting these paintings for other people and making money, I do them for myself. Like it helps me understand my position as a person of colour. And this was just a great one to raise money for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just as well just want to ask about the kind of the figures that are also in your work.
So the figures started out kind of annoyingly about in the last month before lockdown. I was kind of producing a new line of work that was less to do with shape and more to do incorporating figures, and I would have liked for them to have been screen printed. So the white lines you see here, I would have liked to have been screen printed instead of drawn in the way that they have been, but lockdown stopped that. So the figures are kind of a direct response to the questions that I have, such as, it's quite uncomfortable for me that my own mother, who's white, there's a really big part of me she can't ever understand. And that's it is uncomfortable, and it's sad. Like, it's a deeply sad thing with our relationship because we're so close. And the same with my boyfriend, who's white. As much as he wants to try, he can't. And so it's those are me thinking about me as a brown person on my course, me as the only person of colour in my friendship group, and often looking forward, potentially the only person of colour in professional settings, especially maybe in creative fields. So they're just, it's quite also an aesthetic thing. Like, I like drawing figures. it was I think that's also, there is a lighter part to the work. I want them to look good, and I've always said I like the idea of the works being in someone's house and then not knowing it's about race. I feel that's quite powerful. They could buy this and be like, oh, nice painting with figures in it, and I could be like, haha, it's actually about race. And if you put in the work to engage with the work, you find out about it. And I think that's reflective of, if you put in the work to understand people of colour, you can only benefit.
Thanks so much for sharing, Maya. And Elaine, I suppose I didn't say at the start that Husk and Maya, you are both fine art and art history students. And Elaine, you studied art history and curating.
Yes.
So would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and this, which I'm assuming was part of your final project?
Okay, so I am a curator, I guess now, qualified curator. So I think my practice is primarily throughout the whole course of uni just focused on like knowledge production and curation and how that's transmitted through like gallery interpretation. So that's what I wrote my dissertation on, and I'm very interested in that, and sort of focusing on how to make the arts more accessible and less of this intimidating thing that people like walk into a gallery and they're like, oh my god, what's that out there? So so my focus is to try and make the arts more accessible, and I'm very interested in that. So Delayed Implication was the final project.
Can I just say that it felt like some sort of premonition calling it Delayed Implication?
Yeah. Yeah, literally.
That's a coronavirus conspiracy theory.
It's so on point for like the whole situation now. But so Delayed Implication was an exhibition that was meant to be held on the 1st of May. However, unfortunately, that did not happen. It's meant to be at the Bankley Gallery, which is just a little gallery in Levenshulme in Manchester. Very lovely gallery space. And Levenshulme is meant to be this like up and coming space in Manchester. So we're very excited that we got that opportunity. However, that didn't happen. So initially the exhibition was a collaboration with the two other girls on my course, so Selene and Georgie. But the final project, we got to sort of explore the exhibition ourselves independently. So these are the artists that were included. We found the artist from going to an open studios that was held back in February, I think. February, yeah. So we just went around, looked around all the artist studios, which is a really good opportunity because I don't think I've ever looked around the studios in that way before. So it's actually so good to just see what's going on around you that you weren't even aware of. But we picked these artists because all of their work implied a message or implied something without directly addressing it, which sort of sounds like that's what all art does, but it's like we just felt like there was sort of a theme throughout, and when talking to the artists they were all just implying a presence or implying something without actually saying this is what this is. So we thought that would be quite an interesting thing to make an exhibition, because it sort of becomes dependent on audience engagement and what they look at the work and what they take from it, rather than us telling you what you should take from it. So I guess that's sort of making it more accessible. If people see it and they're like, oh, I thought this, but I thought this, no one's wrong. So yeah, we're very happy with those artists.
And I think we just got some images of this is when you visited Bankley Gallery.
Yes, we did a site visit. There was a lovely gallery space. That's, I think that nook was where we're going to have Indiana's work.
So I think even though you weren't able to do the show, you were able to kind of submit your floor plan and how you would visualize the exhibition. So I'm kind of interested with the open studios. How did you, so that was an open studios with fine artists in the School of Art. And so how did you find that experience?
Oh, it was actually so interesting. And I found it very I think before we were all so anxious to go because you just sort of forget, you think, oh, the artists, like, oh my God, and I don't know how to talk to them. But everyone is they're all students at the end of the day, and everyone wants to talk about their work. So it's actually, I thought it was so beneficial to I didn't realise how many studios there were at the beginning anyway. Like, I just go into one and then walk into another one and be like, what? But I think I talked to like hundreds of people on that day, just learning about all their work, and it was just so interesting. It was such a beneficial thing to do. Definitely gave me more confidence to talk to people as well, I think.
I imagine being exhausting by the end.
Yeah, it's so much like information in my head just spinning, but it was actually so interesting to do that.
And in order to kind of realise this exhibition, you know, regardless of whether you're able to kind of actually install the show, but you've had to do a lot of work in terms of kind of pulling that together and talk to a lot of different people. What have you kind of learned from doing that?
Well, I think first of all, I've learned that I think initially when I started my degree, I thought curation was just actually putting an exhibition up, you know, I thought that was it. So from this, I've learned there's actually an unbelievable amount of things to do before you actually like install a show. So I think that's something beneficial that I can take to the future. But yeah, I guess it's just the preparatory stages and how important it is to like collaborate and talk to artists and other curators as well. I think it's very important to just discuss things with people. That's a really beneficial thing that I've got out of it, and I think I've become more confident knowing that is how you are going to get through everything, like collaborating with artists and people. Yeah,
I must say that I have taught Elaine, and she is one of the most organised people that I'm hosting, and that is a key part of curating.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. I will just stop sharing so we can it would be great just to kind of open up some more questions in a more generalized way. So going back to kind of thinking about studios, and I'm asking specifically Husk and Maya here, how often did you use your studio space? How important was it for your practice? And do you think you'll actively seek one out after graduating?
Yeah, I think the studio space, especially, I mean, I've used it quite intensely for the duration of my degree, but in final year especially, it was like, I'd wake up, hopefully leave the house at like 11, get to the studio, and like, I wouldn't leave until 9 or 10 at night. And like, I mean, that sounds like, wow, you're working so hard, but it's not. Like, a lot of that would be like walking to other studios, seeing my friends work, like, just kind of engaging in being in the art school. Like, it's not like I was just there painting and sweating and getting my work done, like, because that's not how it happens. Like, it would be a lot of walking about, like, talking, like, just being there and being present in the like entirety of the art school rather than just, and then like you can go up to like the 6th floor of Benzie, like, and it's fun and like just kind of walk about it. Like,
I think also like the days that we would spend, there would be some days that we would spend like just you'd have lunch and it would just become a conversation that you're having as a group, and you don't feel like you haven't done anything that day because you're still engaging with creativity and engaging with art. But I mean, I have to say Husk is one of the most intensely like studio committed artists. Like no one used the studios as much as Husk. I had a different experience in first year. I was on a different course. I'd moved on to this course, but I still had a studio, and I just didn't use it. I really just didn't do it. And then in second year, I like came and went. And in third year, I just like threw myself in, and kind of what you were talking about earlier, Husk, it created a distinction between what I would be like my life and then art and uni. And it was such a good space. I love how we were there all together, and it was collaborative, and we all would check in with each other, and it was also a really productive space for me anyway. I know some people don't have that experience and they'll find their spaces elsewhere, but for me what made it productive was that, you know, tutors would walk through and you can grab them, and or even just any questions I would say to Husk or Molly, or what do you think of this, should I use this color, whatever. But I think it made me feel like I was part of the art school, like I think that's what you were saying. And I really didn't feel part of the art school when I wasn't using the studios. So in first year particularly, in second year I kind of was coming and going, but I felt like I belonged at art school when you're in the studios and you know the faces, and also it's your space. You don't have to bring anything with you. You just go and you're like, right, now I'm going to be an artist for 9 hours. And as someone who like,
it's like a home away from home. Like I'm in the middle of something and I was like, where's this pair of shoes? And they're just in the studio.
No, you really moved in. You really, I don't think I feel like I moved in, but I've got some, you know, we had like cutlery there and our keep cups and like all of those things that you just have because you're there more than the place that you live in.
Yeah.
So it does become a home away from home, but I personally haven't ever wanted to be an artist, which is interesting choice going to art school. And so I probably won't see getting a studio, but I think I will try. What I've learned from lockdown is that I will try and have a space wherever I live where I can paint or make things. So it's still important to me. I just don't think I personally like need a dedicated studio space.
Well, I think like the conversations that happen in that space can be so integral to what you're making, and having people like question what I'm doing and like being able to bounce off each other, I think that was really important. Like having an environment where, because everybody's kind of like being creative and making things, there's always something to bounce off of.
Yeah.
And you can pick up new ideas, and people obviously are always going to have different mindsets on what you're making. And having those like discussions in that space, like it's like very visceral. It's like, do you know what I mean? You don't plan to have a chat with your mate, but like bigger things can come out of that. And I think that would be like a reason why I'd seek a studio space. But
the
reality of it is like, I'm leaving university. If I get a studio space, like I need to pay for that. I'd need to pay for rent. I'd need to have a job. How do I work to earn enough money to pay rent and have a studio space and use the studio space as well? Like, I do think it's like a privilege to have one. And I think to be able to go as much as I did, like at the last 2 years of uni, but it was like intense. Like I worked in a bar. I wouldn't get home until 4 or 5 sometimes. And I'd have uni the next day, and then
I think also what is a studio without the collaboration that we had? Like for me, I know like the solitary isolated artist is like a thing, we studied it, but for me, I don't know if I would want, part of it is why would I want a studio alone when like there was a point where Husk, me, Molly and a few other people on the course, we were all kind of painting in the same color palette, and we were saying like we would love to put on a show with all our work because it would work together as a group, because you do end up working, as you were saying, like bouncing things off each other, and it was a very supportive space, I think.
Even whenever it's subconscious, like I mean, I use pink constantly, but there was a point where like there's like 5 or 6 like studio spaces in uni that were all just like acid
pink. It was you were influencing everyone, Husk.
There's like Molly obviously uses a lot of like bright pink. I remember just walking through and being like, yeah, great. Keep just never change.
You and I are studioless, but I wondered how important it was for you to use any of the workshops and facilities at the School of Art, and whether they were important to your practice.
Yeah, definitely. I remember like within Unit X we had so many little workshops, and it was even simple things like picture hangings and just things that I had never thought of before, like how to drill something into a solid wall, or I just had no idea about any of it before. And also like vinyl lettering. It was so many little things, and the book binding workshop as well, to like make leaflets for exhibitions. So I think I didn't realise how many workshops would actually benefit my practice at all. I didn't think any of it would, but they were definitely so beneficial, because now I've got the know-how, although I always forget how to make vinyl lettering and how to put it on a wall, but it's in there somewhere. But yeah, it was definitely beneficial.
Just give me a call.
Yeah. I'll have to
do that. All right, well, a question for all three of you. Do you feel like there were any pivotal points in terms of your own practice? So a lot of the students that I've spoken to recently have said that the third year just kind of kicks into gear. People are wary that this is a time to be, really experiment, and actually the power of failure in a lot of practice. So I'm just wondering if there's been a kind of significant time where you might have thought about your practice differently.
I had in first term of third year, because I did a term abroad the year before, I hadn't painted for ages, and I came back and I really got into my practice, and I felt like I was really doing well. And I didn't get a grade that I wanted. I did much worse than I still did like well-ish, but I wanted to do better. And I felt like I'd failed. And I was really, really, and I didn't know how much more committed I could have been to it. But actually, I think that what I learned from that, which proved beneficial in the next assessment, was I think I was just trying to do what I thought people wanted me to do, which I think has been like a recurring feeling for me, because I've battled with being at art school, not wanting to be an artist. I'm kind of like being an artist. I don't know what's going on there. But so I kept thinking, well, what do people want from artists? They want it to be like super out there, or they want it whatever, like, I don't know, whatever people want. But that for me, in that December assessment, and I didn't do as well as I wanted, I was like, okay, I'm just going to make what I want to make now. And actually that let me be more experimental and more free with it. And then I did better, because I actually was producing work that was representative of me, rather than what I thought my tutor wanted me to make.
There's a point, it might have been the same December assessment, but it was in first year, and I was like having a really I don't know, obviously it's a massive pivotal point, living in halls, living away from home. I've moved to a new city, everything's different. I'm in uni, and I became really obsessed with Big Brother. And I would just watch Big Brother. My art was about Big Brother, everything was Big Brother. And then I was like, oh, sick, I'm applying for Big Brother. And I remember I got an email that was like, Husk, you're invited to an audition. And I remember sitting down with Rick, and I was like, listen, I've applied for Big Brother, what happens if I get on? What about my studies? Can we defer it? And he was like, yeah, entirely. I think this would be really good for your practice.
I love Rick.
And then it made me really think about all these things that I was doing, and realizing how what I present is just kind of a bit of my lived everyday life, and it put some kind of gravity and weight on the things that I do. So it kind of overwhelmed me, because I realized it doesn't stop. And then I sit down for a few days. But then I think that all came back around, especially in third year, where it felt completely natural just to go to the studio every day and just make work like that. And I feel like even putting in long days, long hours, and producing a lot, like it never really felt like it was unnecessary or too much, or like it always felt very like the right thing to be doing at that time.
I think definitely third year, I think I've just gained a lot more confidence in my practice. I would say, I think in first and second, I just like sort of just averaging in all my essays and things. And then the Unit X exhibitions wouldn't necessarily, I remember in second year in my group, I had 2 other curators on my group as well. So it wasn't like I could create the whole exhibition by myself. We shared, like collaborated. So I think in the third year I definitely found, after writing my dissertation, like doing all the research for it and then doing quite well in it, I think it's just gave me the confidence throughout the rest of my practice, just be like, do you know what, like you're actually quite good at this and a bit smart, so go on, like go out there and talk to people about art things, like you actually know what you're talking about. So I think just putting in that much work into something and then achieving like probably higher than I thought I should have achieved, I was just like, right, okay, like you can actually do this. And I think that was definitely like a pivotal point for my confidence.
Yeah, I think there's a moment that happened for me like that as well, where I feel like, I don't know, I was just making things but never questioning it myself, and then there was just a moment where it just kind of clicked. I feel like I was just making things that made more sense. They were like more, not quite thought out, but they just made more sense, like because I use a lot of like found resources, like, which is another thing why like art school and having a studio is good, because like have paints that have been in bins, like in the fashion bins, like this is like a piece of rubber from like the bins in the fashion school. And then I remember like I used to paint on paper because it was like the only thing that was in the studio. Like I like any canvases that I paint on I find, or people make them for me. So yeah.
I think also, just on your point, Elaine, about feeling like in a way useful with the knowledge that you had when you started doing well and like gaining confidence. When I went to America to work in the gallery, I felt that's when I think that was probably another pivotal thing for me, because I just spent the year studying like post-war American art history, and then I went and I was like, about this, study this. Like you feel useful, you feel like, oh, actually I have got something to add to this conversation, which I don't think you do get until a bit later in your degree, because then you start synthesizing things, and like when you start doing your dissertation, you're like bringing these things in that you've kind of always felt a bit scattered away, and then you're given the control to go like, okay, this is why it's relevant. So you do just feel more confident once you're able to do that, I think.
And so in your third year, I know that you organise events such as Futures Talks, where you invite arts professionals in to come and speak. So with that in mind, I just wonder if you have received any particular advice, or you've been inspired by anyone speaking, maybe at the Whitworth Talks, maybe a tutor, and yeah, if there's anything that you are going to take with you.
I think for me it happened on like, it was one of the last Futures Talks. It was with Pink Manchester, and over like the course there was like 10 talks of like various people in creative industries. A lot of artists just kept saying like, you can't like plan it, like things just happened, it's not what you make, so you know, but it's not who you know, it's about what you make, and like things will happen if they're gonna happen. And I was just kind of like somebody gave definitive answers, so at the end of the talk I was like, listen, like people just keep saying like things happen, and then it was Liam was like, yeah, like just be obnoxious, be a bit brash, like just speak to people. And then I think having those talks was really important at that time of year, and like because that was kind of where my head was at, was messaging a lot of people and trying to get involved in anything that I could really. And then lockdown happened. But I think just hearing that from anyone is just because you don't like to think that way, kind of. You don't like to be climbing, but you kind of have to, and it's not obnoxious really. It is just like, look at me.
And people want to help you. Like, that was the thing that when I went away, I was like, oh god, this is like really cringe. I'm gonna have to email all these people and be like, hi, I'm so great, hire me. And actually, like, they just wanted, they're interested in you. And even if they can't help you like straight away, other people can. But in terms of the futures thing, I think you're right. Like, it happened at a really good time of year. I think everyone was, we had, I don't think you had, Elaine, like, we just handed in our dissertations and we were kind of like, okay, what are we doing with our lives? And I remember, I think his name's Brenno Callahan, the curator at home.
Yeah.
He did a talk, and I think the biggest thing I took away from his talk was he was talking about all of these different jobs he'd done, like working in a video store, and then he worked at the BBC, like working in kind of programming, and all these things. He was like, some art jobs, and then he said about what he learned in all those jobs and how that led to him being the curator of home now. And I felt that was quite reassuring to hear, because I've had like hospitality job after hospitality job, and I never thought that they would be at all useful to like put on a master's application, but actually they are. Like, there's loads of skills that I've learned through those jobs that are or could be applicable to creative jobs. And Rick said to me, like, in one of my like, what am I doing at art school moments, Rick was just like, you don't have to do it, like, just make what you want to make, don't care about what other people you think, what other people expect you to be. And I think that was so reassuring. And he always just like, look, do the assessment and then you can put the paintbrushes down afterwards, and then no one's gonna make you do it afterwards. And I think that was quite, when you're in uni, it can feel as much as we were in the studio, like, it can feel like your whole life is just working towards this assignment, this assessment, because you really want to do well, you're aware of how important it is for your final grade. But actually, just to have someone be like, okay, you need to like take yourself out of this a bit, like get a bit of perspective and just exist beyond the walls of your studio, and just, it's fine, like, it will all work out, which is like kind of not reassuring in a global pandemic, but I do feel like it will be.
You're very lucky to have tutors that you can just have like such open and honest conversations with, like, about what you're doing. Like
Yeah,
there's
we've had great tutors.
holds barred, like, it just, like, yeah, it's just like having a conversation with anyone else.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. I remember when I went to a talk, and then I said to Zoe, I was like, afterwards, I was like, oh, I was gonna approach them, but I wasn't sure because I didn't know what to say. And she was like, just go say hi. And I was like, all right, okay, yeah. And it's just people reassuring you constantly, I think, throughout uni, and the tutors just reassuring, like, everyone in the local art scene are just people like you. Like, you always just like put them on a pedestal and think, oh my god, like,
everyone in the local and global art scene.
yeah, true. I'm trying to progress. I'm trying to, but like, it's just like, it is just like, everyone is just people. I think that's just like, in my mind, I just think you're just literally a person, and everyone, it's so true what you said, like, everyone just wants to help, especially in this industry. People are here to help people in this industry.
And they know how hard it is. Like, that's the biggest thing I took from Futures, was they were like, it's hard, like, leaving art school in the kind of world that we live in, where like creativity maybe isn't as valued as it should be. It's hard, and like, actually sometimes that's all you need to hear as a graduating student who's panicking about graduating in a pandemic. You just need someone to be like, it's hard, it's fine.
It was after the pink talk as well, like, I was talking to Katie, because it was Katie and Liam didn't talk, but we were walking the same way, and Katie, they were on their way to like their hospitality job, and like, they still had all these things happening, like, and they were like really excited for this project. And then like, it was very just like relatable, because I think I was going to work that night as well. And just seeing people do the thing that you're working towards is so gratifying, and it makes you feel like you can't, because I think we're all kind of in art school, and I think there's a part in the back of your brain where it's like, it doesn't happen, like, it never happens. But just seeing like people grasp what you're kind of clutching at is really reassuring, for whatever reason it is. But it really felt like, for me, like, this isn't a waste of time, like, there's something happening here.
And can I just ask about the art history side? How important has it been to have the critical thinking and the theory alongside your practice?
I think I'd be bored without it.
Yeah, I think I would be. We've talked about this a lot, like in the studio, how, I mean, it's not loads of extra commitment, but it is just like those extra hours outside of the I mean, it's still creative. I still find that art history super creative, but I think the biggest thing, having moved on to from a course that had no art history to a course that was half art history, I felt like it was so valuable to work out where I fitted into it. And I think in terms of my practice, it got me thinking so much. It was so much more than what artist am I going to take that inspiration from. It was like, where do I fit into this period of time, and who has done that before, and what could potentially happen in the future. And it properly contextualized our practices. Whereas so now I feel like, regardless of whether I'm an artist or not, I feel like I know where I fitted into that, and where I fitted into the long line of artistic practice, and also maybe appreciate art so much more. Like it changed the way I go to galleries and museums, and I have a new appreciation for like how all of the different minds that go into just creating a show. Even if it's a show I don't like, I'm still like, I still will go into it and think about it academically because of how many artists we've studied. That's so, I think it that's the biggest thing. It's completely changed the way I go to galleries and museums, for the best, obviously.
I think we've been lucky the way that we've been taught art history as well, because it hasn't just been like straightforward, like A to Z. It's kind of the different movements that, like, in the Western canon of art history, like I probably wouldn't know about it if it wasn't for my lecturers. I just think that always made me like really question like what you're told, especially about the art, or like it's inherently like quite terrible in a lot of ways. And like, yeah, just I think we're lucky to have not just been on the straight and narrow. Like it always, like our lecturers always tried to keep us like actually informed. Like we all know who Andy Warhol is, but like the Gotha movement, for example, like
I feel it was beneficial that it was quite contemporary as well. I think we touched the bases with the older stuff, but we were like, right, let's like do the last 200 years or 150 years, because that's actually what we're interested in. So that I'm glad that it was like that, as opposed to getting books of dust on them and like seeing what was going on like 1,000 years ago.
I just think like you forget how like art is based on theoretical and practical. Like, I think you always like, it's easy to forget that, like especially like whether you're a fine artist, you're making the work, and you do forget how much of like theoretical does inform all your work that you do, because even in your sketchbooks you still like have to like reference artists that inspire you and stuff like that. And I just think it's been so beneficial for that, especially in curation as well. I just think knowing about art definitely helps to like write about art and make an exhibition. I think it's very well balanced as well. I think it's been like perfectly balanced, I would say.
I feel like I could ask so many more questions, but we may melt. It is
getting very warm.
But thank you all so much for participating in this, and I feel like it's sad to see you all go, but I hope you stay in touch, and I'm looking forward to doing a physical show in the art school at some point next year. But until then, keep well, and I look forward to seeing all your work in the digital showcase. And that's all for me, but thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, and see you.
Bye.